So this will be a fairly brief introduction to the idea of tools. And tools are not really a new idea, and they certainly predate computing. So, bear in mind, we're doing this computing because we want to get insight out of our data, not because we want the data themselves. And that's quite an historical idea. These are actually a couple of things back from the 1850s. People may recognize them. This is credited being the very first pie diagram ever drawn. This is Florence Nightingale's analysis of deaths in the British Army during the Crimean War. And this is John Snow's analysis of deaths from cholera in the 1854 cholera epidemic in London. John Snow, yes. It turned out John Snow did know something. What he was actually able to show was that the deaths were actually all centred around that water pump. It was the one that had actually been infected with cholera. And here we also see from Florence Nightingale demonstrating that deaths from actual fighting were hugely outweighed by deaths from disease. The point of both of these, they could have both been done as lists. The point of both of these is that actually typically when dealing with this sort of information, the person doing the analysis is not the actual decision maker. And an awful lot of the purpose of analysis is actually persuading the person who needs to make the decision what decision they need to make. So it's not just about analysis, it's also about how you visualize it, and it's about how that visualization gets explained to people who actually need to make the decision. And I guess for the next 100 years or so, things kind of carried on in much the same sort of way. The idea of assessing the situation, acquiring data, appraising those data, applying them, and then reassessing. The basic idea of what I call modern medicine really came through in those following few years. And also the idea that it isn't just about the clinician. It's about the clinician, the patient, and the science working together to produce the best outcomes. And much of this actually was put together by Archie Cochrane and Feinstein in the 1960s and 70s around what became known as the idea of evidence-based medicine. But of course what they were dealing with was essentially the same sorts of data as Florence Nightingale had 100 years earlier. And then a whole lot of new stuff happened. All sorts of new data, imaging, heat maps, disease maps, metabolomics, wearable devices, all came on. Huge amounts of data started appearing. And those data no longer could be analysed one at a time like we saw in the previous slide. They need to be brought together. They need to be brought into what kind of has been known in some projects as the handprint. And after the handprint, what we're saying is actually we have the classic contents of big data. We have, we have the variety, we have the volume, we have the velocity. So we have all the features of classic big data that you see in the banking industry, that you see in oil industry, that you see in all these major industries that deal with large amounts of data. But we actually also have some of our own little challenges that we throw in just to make it more interesting for us. We have all these issues around access control, consent, findability, all these things we were talking about this morning. And all of them make our challenges even bigger than the challenges faced by most people like Google or ESO who are dealing with big data. So what we're going to be hearing about this afternoon, I think, is a whole group of tools which are starting to look at these sorts of challenges. And you saw this slide already from Scott earlier on today. What you've got is a whole group of tools being developed that are trying to address those sorts of issues. And we're going to hear about many of these later on today. So the features of these tools, huge amounts of data, but also we're starting to develop tools that contain that are flexible, that are powerful, easy to use, scalable, communicate well, and above all, join together to form more complex and more powerful solutions. So, without further ado, I will pass over to the first of our speakers for this afternoon session, Professor Guo, who is going to give us kind of, I guess, a background and look at how what we're doing now is moving through into what he's calling the inflection point with the data. So, hopefully, we'll be able to pass over. Okay. So, don't forget, the insights, not the numbers.